So we're basically about, this is all about the first Sunday mass, no? I mean,
Yes.
that,
And
okay, okay.
also, yeah, yeah. All right. So, good afternoon, Dr. Chas
Mm-hmm.
Navarro.
Yes, good afternoon too. Huh?
So nice that we can do this conversation even if we are away. So, siguro
Mm-hmm.
before we start, siguro introduce yourself a little bit for our students and our listeners, siguro.
Okay. Well, I'm Francis M. Navarro. Well, as you've heard, my other name is also Chaz. That's
Chas.
why your professor is calling me also by that, Chaz. I'm a professor of history at the Department of History at the Ateneo de Manila University, where I am a assistant professor. I specialize in Philippine colonial history, Trans-Pacific studies, Hispanic studies, and cartographical and archival studies, which I took as a specific course for my PhD in Spain. No, I joined the Ateneo in 2013 when I returned from Spain. But as a teacher, I've been teaching already for more than 30 years before until I joined the Ateneo upon my return. And maybe as mentioned also by your professor, I was recently in a panel of specialists, as they refer to it, of the National Historical Commission to reinvestigate the reopening of the case on the first mass in the Philippines, okay, dated March 31st, 1521, and it was a case that was reopened due to request again after what you might call previous panels had already made the ruling that Limasawa was the site of the first mass of in the Philippines. Okay.
All right.
So that is basically my latest work with the National Historical Commission of the
Sige.
Philippines.
We'll talk about it in a little bit, no, yung work
Uh-huh.
mo doon. Kasi that's very interesting for me and for some of my students. So first
Okay.
question, this is something that some of my students can relate because they're taking arts, no, or let's
Mm-hmm.
say generally in the liberal arts or the arts.
Okay.
For
Mm-hmm.
example, why take up history? Kasi 'di ba ano, they always say like ako I finish political science, you finish history. So my students
Mm-hmm.
are taking arts. Um 'Di ba? Palagi sinasabi sa atin ng parents natin, ba't yan pinag-aralan mo ng pera diyan or whatever. Pero in your journey as an ano, as a historian, why did you take up history? What started your interest siguro with
Actually,
history?
with history, it started when I was young. I think
Mm.
as early as, I think to be honest, as early as grade six,
Mm.
I was already interested in history because we grew up, my brothers and my sister, we grew up surrounded by books in the old house of my grandparents and my great grandparents. So we were surrounded by books and printed material.
Mm.
And I remember the first book I ever took from the shelf of my grandparents was a book on European history, and it was actually a college textbook, according to my professor at UP later on, that they used it when they were in college. But it was there, so I read it, and then the second book I got from the shelf that I read page to page was the book of History of the Filipino People by Teodoro Agoncillo and another professor at the time, Oscar Alfonso. And by that time, I knew that I was interested in history, but I only thought about taking history as a course in fourth year high school when I was choosing the career I wanted to take. Of course, just like what you said, I was discouraged by my family, by my parents. Kasi nga, my brothers, so they were already in college. My sister, so they were already taking college degrees in the area of business and economics, and I was taking a degree that would definitely end up either researching or teaching. And so the same thing, there's no money there. And as a joke, I remember I was teaching already that I was checking papers at my old years ago, and my mother commented, "When will I look for a real job?" And so I said that, "Oh, this is a job," and she said, "No, that's not a job because you're just checking papers, checking papers." But well, at the end, they accepted the fact that that this was the field for me, and I'm very happy with it. I have no regrets. Uh, I think there's no better place for me than either to be in the library or to be inside the classroom. Okay, so
Yeah.
that's why I ended with history. Okay.
All right. So, as a historian, no, syempre, I'm following also your Facebook kasi we're friends on Facebook. No?
Mhm.
You had this encounter with the King of Spain. When was that? 2018, 2019?
18, 2018.
2018. Sabi ko, wow.
2018.
But so tell us about that kasi it's a rare experience to be able
Well,
to deliver a lecture.
well, I was invited to an international conference sponsored by the Ministry of Defense of Spain
Hmm.
and the well, I will have to say it in English, the Royal Society of History of Spain.
Hmm.
Okay, I was well, I'm still very honored because I was the only Filipino to be included in that particular conference. It was
I
held in
see.
March of 1890 in 19 no, in 2018. I'm looking at the previous century, 2018, and it was a conference on Sebastian Elcano, uh, because the name of the conference was Primus Circumdistere Me, meaning you in that was the motto of Elcano afterwards. After he successfully circumnavigated the world, you
Yeah.
were the first to go around me. No,
Hmm.
so that's anyway. I was there um, for a conference, and I was tasked to deliver a paper on the Philippines at the point of the Spanish contact. And well, some even up to now, I when I look at the uploaded video by the conference that I delivered in Spanish, that now when I look at it and listen to it, I was surprised I survived talking for an hour in Spanish, you know. That.
Yes.
Pero, well, it was an international event because there were many people from around the world invited, but how many of us were invited to talk? About 10 or 11. Anyway, on the last day of the conference, before I forget, the reason it was celebrated in 2018 was because in 2018, Magellan, Ferdinand Magellan, signed the contract with the Holy Roman Emperor at that time, Charles I, regarding the expedition that he was going to undertake. And the conference was held at Valladolid to commemorate what they call the Protocolos de Valladolid, meaning the agreement signed between Magellan and the Spanish king on the voyage. And so it started from there. Well,
I see.
the climax of the conference was on the last day with when the Spanish king and queen closed the ceremony in another place in the city with visitors so and so, with officials. And well, remember the king and the queen, we were not introduced personally to him. I was not seated up in the front row. Most of us were at the back because all the seats were filled up. And one of the wife of the organizer of the conference during the so-called celebration already, drinking and eating that morning, told me, "Oh, you should see the king now. Come on!" And she pushed me, and I didn't realize that there was a line for that, but I was just pushed in front of the king. and the queen was there. And I started my conversation with the king, and he said, "Oh, I want to go to the Philippines one day." Yeah, and then I told him, let me tell you a story, Your Majesty. When I was in 1975, I saw your parents when they were the princess of the Principes de Bourbon, because I was in grade school and we were near the palace, so we had to wave Spanish flags,
Yeah.
and we were there to greet them, and we had a picture with the king, with the queen, no, but I never had that photograph, no. And then he said, "Oh, one day I will do the same thing as my parents." And then I told him, I was holding my iPad, and I said, "May I request Your Majesty a favor?" "Yes, why not? Can I? Why? Can I have a photo with you? Like And then I just turned on my iPad. Well, it's not it's going to be informal. And then he said, "Okay, put your iPad like that." And okay, that's fine. And then he stared at the iPad. He smiled. I smiled, and then boom. And then when I uploaded it, there were hundreds of comments and likes all over, and they said, "No one just takes a selfie with the king."
Yeah.
Okay, I to do that. Okay, and so that was my claim to fame.
So
When the
it might
Spanish
it
king.
yeah, it might have been seen as a breach of protocol, but anyway you did it.
Yeah,
No.
I did it. Well, because one other participant wanted to have a picture taken with him, and he was just raising his photograph, at least, but not with him. When
Yeah.
the security officer put his hand on the camera and moved it away, the camera. While in my case, I simply went to the king, talked to him, and no one stopped me. Okay, so I
Yeah.
think that was a I was blessed that day to have an encounter with a real monarch.
Yeah. That was, I mean, the opportunity was there, no? All right.
Yeah.
So,
So,
let's now talk about the main topic about
uh,
we're doing this interview. So, let's talk about the Magellan expedition. So,
okay.
can you describe for us the situation in Spain by the time Magellan left to explore the world? Kasi you might some of our students understand na well, Spain is not a superpower, but at that time Spain was a superpower, right? So can you describe what drove the Spanish to explore the world and in rivalry with their neighbors, the Portuguese?
You know, whenever I would tell this part already in our history, I would have to go back, how would I say, 20 years before that.
Yeah.
So, more or more, no? So, Magellan's arrival in the Philippines, 1521. But an important event occurred in Spain in 1491, no? Well, Spain was not a country yet
Mm.
by by the end of the 1400s. Spain was a conglomeration of kingdoms. And remember, uh, and this is something we will see in our history, Spain was conquered by the Moors for 700 years. And for 700 years, Spain was trying to gain its freedom.
Yeah.
So that's why they call it the Reconquista, no, the reconquering of the Christian lands. Now, it all ended when the last Spanish or the last Muslim bastion in Spain, Granada, fell, and the monarchs at the time, Isabella la Católica and Ferdinand of Aragon, uh, in a marriage of unity, united Spain, and then Spain was born as a nation. Okay. Now, remember that was in 1491. Now, by 1491, Spain was behind, and its small neighbor Portugal was much ahead of them, because the Portuguese had discovered Africa, had discovered a way to the Spice Islands in Asia, so they were ahead, and the markets in Europe were all flowing through Lisbon. So Portugal was a small nation that basically preempted Spain in all of the age of exploration. Now, 1492, you have the great discovery of Columbus of the Americas. Okay, and that placed Spain on the map. Why? Because suddenly Columbus, on his way to India via the west, was blocked by one big continent. That
Yeah.
was the American continent, and the American continent, okay, therefore was a major prize for them. Okay. So that started Spain's path towards empire building. And it went on and it never stopped. And of course, the search for spices, the search for new routes, the search for God, gold, and glory never stopped until, okay, they were able to put their flag on all the four major continents of the world. So that's how Spain marched towards it being an empire, and at the same time, by the time it became an empire, they were practically, how would I put it, in all the four continents, okay, through the major routes that they've connected all these four major continents, and they had monopolies everywhere. Okay. So you might say Spain started poor, no, but of course, in order for Spain to become powerful, to become rich, they had to compete economically outside the trade,
Yeah.
and that was a big gamble. Okay. So that's how they got into the picture.
All right. So this is one I don't know. I think it's an oversimplification, no? I
Mm-hmm.
always get asked by my students about this.
Uh,
About the rivalry between Spain and Portugal daw. Was it really about spices lang or was it something
cultural
that
and
goes deeper? Kasi they always ask me, "Sir, talaga ba po bang spices lang pinagtatalunan yung dalawang yan and they divided the world for it?" I mean, no, there are other factors of course, but yeah,
mhm.
yun. Was it really about spices lang?
Well, to be honest, even up to now, the Spanish and the Portuguese have what you call their ethnic differences.
Yeah.
So I was recently in Portugal last December for this a series of talks, also on the same topic,
Mm.
and and one Portuguese academic said, and even the tourist guides, no, the Portuguese tourist guides and the Portuguese, they would say, they don't understand the Spanish. When they come here, we understand them, but they cannot understand us. Okay, so they always feel that way. Na parang um, uh, where yes, they're neighbors, but totally it's Portuguese and Castellano. Let's use the word Castellano, which is Spanish and a Castilian language. Two totally different languages. Ethnically, they're different. Kasi you have the Iberian Peninsula, no, the entire peninsula, including Portugal. Pero the people in during the Roman times, the Romans called what is present day Portugal as Lusitania,
Mm.
Lusos. So the Lusos. And of course, on the other side would be the Ibericos, the Spanish, right?
Spanish.
Yes. So from the very beginning, they've always been ethnically different from each other. They, well, of course, in terms of national pride, the Spanish always would say that, well, Portugal became part of Spain during the time of Philip II. So there was no other heir to take over the throne, and we all know that Portugal and Philip II was half Portuguese.
Yeah.
And so, by right of his mother passed on to him, he was also the heir to the Spanish, to the Portuguese throne. And so, that was an added slap to the Portuguese. So suddenly they became part of the Spanish Empire.
Yeah.
And then when Philip II died, of course, they reverted back to their own, no, to their own kingdoms, okay? To to their independent kingdom. So yes, what was the rivalry? It was economically it was on the trade routes, the spices, but also it it was a matter of national pride. You have the Portuguese, a small country, much ahead of a larger country, and that was Spain. And that's why, you see, Spain also would consider the Portuguese also as a major rival, But you know, the other day, was it yesterday? Or the other day, I was talking with a historian friend.
Yeah.
Well, one thing you will notice between the two, the Portuguese, since they were a small country, yes, they were able to go to other countries, to these parts like that, but because of their smallness, because they were not that big in terms of population, they were not able to take over entire continents. So they
Mm.
were small. While the Spanish, they had the manpower, they had not only the money, but what was important was the manpower that they had. Okay, and so in the future, the Spanish would overrun the Portuguese. So it would be just in a matter of, how would I say, 20 years, no? Well, by the time of Columbus, the entire American continent from north to south, and what was Portuguese property? Just one. That's Brazil. So you see, they already had more. Okay, so that is why by that time, eh, Portugal will be eclipsed later on. But it
Right.
will take a while because, diba, in our history, the Portuguese also wanted the Spanish to leave the Philippines,
Yes.
and no, because of the division of the world, no. And by right, we were on that side of the Portuguese territory.
Mm.
Okay, but of course, there was no one knew exactly the coordinates. Kasi everything was done by cutting to a piece of paper by the Pope. Kinati lang
Uh,
ganun. And that's it. And so it was a battle between latitudes and longitudes.
Altitudes.
Yes. So, but both sides trying to say that it's theirs. But in all honesty, if you will look at it, we were supposed to be in the on the other side, and that would be in the Portuguese sphere of influence.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So basically, that's, well, I would put it. So the rivalry still goes on even up to now.
But I think it's a friendly rivalry na, no?
Well, friendly rivalry. Well, uh, it's a friendly rivalry, of course. The only thing is when it comes to football, no, that's a different matter.
Yes.
In terms of trade and everything, because of the European Union, I mean, the old rivalries are gone. Now it's a different form of rivalry,
Yeah.
a different one.
All right. So let's talk about the questions about the Magellan expedition. No?
Now,
I usually give this question kasi to my students. Well, even before the lockdown happened, and I always give this a mind game na
okay,
um, between Limasawa and Masao, based on the evidence that I will give to you, for example, this is in the classroom, based on the evidence that I will give to you, where do you think Magellan landed and had the first mass? So, and now, last August 21, if I'm not mistaken,
yes,
the NHCP released the a
aha,
resolution which that supported the Mujeres panel of which you were a member, no? So,
the
tell
long,
us yeah,
the
so tell
longest.
us briefly, what's this debate about and how did you come up with the decision?
Well, previous to the Mohares panel, because the panel was headed by the National Artist for Historical Literature, no? That's
Yes.
Dr. Ritil Mojares. That's why we call it the Mojares panel. There were two other panels before that. Okay, the first panel was in 1995, and they called it the Gankaiko panel. Okay, which also came out with a decision that it was Limasawa. And the case was again reopened because, of course, uh, the losing party was never satisfied. Okay,
Yes.
never satisfied. Well, at the same time, it was contended that the Gancayco panel in 1995, and later on the Legarda panel, headed by the late Dr. Benito Legarda. Uh, in that would be the panel in 2008. It came out also with the what they call that, with the decision that it was Limasawa. Okay.
Alright.
But years later, last year, the case had to be reopened again. And it was upon the request of the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines to the National Historical Commission for the for the issue to be resolved again, and hopefully finally. Okay. Now, what was the reason for the panel, for the existence of a third panel? That not everyone was listened to, not
Alright.
everyone was heard. Okay, so this panel, the Mojares panel, which, okay, if I may tell you,
Mm.
we were in existence for a year. We
Mm.
were traveling from one place to the other, interviewing people, inviting people to present their sides, okay, uh, to, to present new evidences, okay, in a friendly atmosphere. And it was not just the Mojares panel. The Mojares panel, oh, we were composed of what? Dr. Rizal Mojares, Dr. Danny Hirona of the Partido State University, who is the author of the book on Ferdinand Magellan, okay, which I think is somewhere here, but I should present it so that students might be able to buy and read it. It's very
Yeah.
good, archival sources, and wait, to be honest, is there. Okay, this is the book,
Yes.
Ferdinand Magellan. Okay, that's so Dr. Hirona, Dr. Rizal Mohari, Dr. Hirona, Father Antonio de Castro, the Society of Jesus, who represented the Church Association Historians of the Philippines, Carlos Madrid, who used to be the director of the Instituto Cervantes in Manila, who is also an author of two books on the Philippines. Okay, and then Dr. Jose Victor Torres of De La Salle University, and then me. Okay, also, and in my role in the panel, had an extra one, and that is I was also the choreographer, meaning
Mm.
I was assigned in the transcription and translation of specific documents for this particular panel. No, now what I was going to say earlier. Well, together with us was another set of historians who were there to observe and also to present their findings, and that was the Church Association of the Philippines. Okay, so priests, church historians who also, okay, were interested because they were appointed by the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines to also look into the matter. So we worked together. Now, what was the main advantage of our panel? It was it because it was composed of a larger group of people? No, it's because we listened to everyone as much as possible. We traveled to Cebu, to Butuan. We went to Leyte and took a boat to Limasawa. We climbed up the mountain. So it was not, meaning we were there because we love what we were doing, not because we were paid well. No, it was totally not that. We were asked to serve.
Mm.
So well, the National Historical Commission, in their words, that it came upon the time that the nation had to call upon its historians to historians, no, to make they said to ano, we even went to the most extreme defenders of the other side that it was not in Massawa but in Butuan. Okay, in Butuan or Masawa. Okay, so basically that was what we did, and that was our advantage.
Correct.
We as much as possible into the matter. Okay, we asked copies from Italy and from France to send us versions of the Pigafetta Chronicle in French and Italian, and I had to look for a French translator and an Italian translator who understood the Renaissance language of French and Italian. Okay? And I was the one in charge of translating documents from Spanish into English. Okay? So that's why it was different. Okay, this panel was different.
All right.
I don't know if I veered away from it, but but that anyway. They just keep on asking me.
Mm. Um, I'm actually reading right now the summary of the technical report because
Oh,
I know that the technical report is around 70 pages long, but I have the summary here right now. So you actually had the original, no, not the original, but copies of the original that was sent to you. So
yes,
you had it transcribed, and then from based on the
translated.
transcription, then you
Mhm.
added the evidence. So um there's this part here that you even look at the latitudes and the longitudes of the island that um Pigafetta described, no? So it's very comprehensive. So you really had to check on the geography and all those things.
Oh, well, remember that, of course, the most important document here was Pigafetta.
Yes.
But you also have to remember that in the crew of Pigafetta, there was another person who also made notes on
Mm.
the expedition. See what Pigafetta did, he wrote everything later on.
Ah, okay.
While Albo, the assistant, wrote it as it was happening. Okay. But also, you have to take into consideration another point. This was a period when, what you call that, uh, the idea of map making was not perfect.
Yes.
Idea of coordinates were not perfect. Where latitude and later on longitude would be used, okay? So the main battle here would be the interpretation and the stories behind these particular coordinates.
Mm.
Because we try to look into all the sources, and of course, the interpretation would also be different from the other points of view. So, like for example, we had to go to Butuan, and of course, Butuan is a very rich, has a very rich history, right?
Yes, yes.
And the proponents of the Butuan Masawa angle would say, why would the Spanish be interested in going to Limasawa when there was nothing on Limasawa and everything was in Butuan? So they said that that's one major, what they call that, one major evidence that
Argument
they were
or
presenting.
evidence.
If Magellan was looking for riches, he would have come to Butuan, Masawa, okay, but
Mm.
not there. Okay. Anyway, we went to Butuan, just to give you we went there twice, okay, and that's where we encountered strict, talaga, the defenders of the other side, no?
Yes.
That's why when this decision came, the joke that we make is that we will be persona non grata already over there. Okay.
Mm.
But anyway, so we saw the balangays, no? We saw the riches of Butuan, and we also went to the so-called landing points of the Spanish, where they actually landed in Butuan, and there were three area, three, I three so-called points that supposedly were the landing point of the Spanish.
Mm.
Okay? So even in Butuan, you see, they could not agree. And then one, I wouldn't like to say it funny, but it's a very interesting angle. You know, the Agusan River is very wide,
Mm.
and it is believed that the original island known as Masawa had was eaten up by the waters, in the future. So it totally disappeared. Why? Because by 1585, there was no mention of Mazawa already in the map
Mm.
in Butuan. Wala na. So they said that it had disappeared, eaten up by the waters because it's a swampy area. Okay, it's a swampy area. But still, we didn't stop there. We looked and looked, interviewed people. We invited people to present their evidences. There were those who didn't present themselves anymore. And even after the decision has been made, a new evidence came up, but we said we could not entertain it anymore, because
Yeah.
it could have been presented before, you know. So we went and we decided one of our last major trips was to go to Limasawa. Okay, Limasawa itself, the southern point of Leyte.
Yeah.
And as imagine, it was a 4-hour ride from Tacloban to the southernmost point of Leyte. And then from there, another an hour and a half to go to the island.
Mm.
And then we climbed up all the way to the point because it is said that from the point on the top of the mountain, they could see 3 points. And we saw the 3 points of this island. Okay.
Mm.
Pinpointing that this is the place where okay, uh, Magellan arrived, and this was where the exact spot based on the description that Magellan actually landed. But also in the Masawa, there's another contention. A
Yes.
well-known historian, Dr. Rolando Borinaga, okay, contested, and it's in the report maybe that you've read, that he also recommended that it should be considered that the long accepted fact that Magallanes landed on this side of Limasawa should now be reconsidered and transferred to the other side of the
Transferred.
island.
Yes. Yes.
To the barangay called Triana. Okay,
Mm.
because for many evidences, the the sinkage, no, the description from where we saw the points. Okay, so that's what we recommended.
Mm. So it's another transfer pala of the site of the first mass, no? If
Yeah. So from
ever.
what it would be on the other side.
Mm. On the other
So it
side
was
of
an
the.
I think that they basically that was what made us decide again that the original rulings should be upheld. Okay, but more so because we actually saw it. The two previous panels never traveled.
Mm.
They were just in
Right.
Manila. Okay, we traveled. That's why it took us a year. The previous ones, 1 day, 3 days. Us a
Mm.
year.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Because
you see, go ahead, go ahead.
kaya I was reading the report. It's very comprehensive actually. Kasi they mentioned here the primary sources that you had, and then yun nga, you travel to the places to check out the location.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an interesting observation na it really took you a year compared to the previous two panels that had, you know, yun nga, a very short
Mm.
time to come up with a decision.
Yeah. So of course they listened, which was okay. They listened, no. But for us, we really had to look into the evidences. That's why
Mm.
we traveled. So we had to give up our responsibilities because it was a special commission, not just from the historical commission, but it was a special commission to solve something that would benefit our nation's history.
Mm.
So that is what we gave up on certain days.
Yeah.
Okay,
So you mentioned
and
earlier,
for me, I would consider it.
yeah.
Mm,
Sige, go
yes,
ahead.
please go on. No, no,
Sige,
go
go
ahead, go
ahead.
ahead. Mm. No, no, that's what I said. I was just saying that we were. That's why. working on this panel was an experience not only for all of us, but it was also a duty that we had to perform.
I see. All right. So the next question, you mentioned earlier that aside from the Pigafetta account, that there's also this logbook from Francisco Albo. Tama ba? Francisco Albo.
Yeah, so
Can you tell a little bit about it? Kasi ano when we're talking about the Magellan Expedition, it's always the Pigafetta account that we're looking at. Ngayon lang
yeah,
lumabas tong Francisco Albo. So bakit parang ngayon lang siya na nakakuha, tsaka, and the
well,
Genoese pilot also.
yeah. Okay, well, basically, it was the main cosmographer here and the main geographer was Pigafetta. He
Yes.
was hired to do that. Except Albo, who was part of the crew, a minor officer, did his job by simply logging everything day by day.
Hmm.
Okay, day by day. Now, it is unfortunate that when Pigafetta returned to Spain and then he wrote what he experienced during this period. Okay, uh, unfortunately, the original is no longer to be found because um, it is believed that he presented it to the Pope, no, the account. But beyond that, there's no evidence on where that particular or the original account they was left to be kept. Okay, but it is believed that it was gone. It's gone, not totally
Hmm.
gone. Now, another matter to be considered here was that Pigafetta's accounts were later on reproduced into languages, Italian and French, which also could be a cause uh, uh, of what we call that misconceptions because of misinterpretations.
Yes.
Okay, so they may be translations of Pigafetta, but not totally accurate. Okay. But again, we have no other evidence except for this ones.
Hmm.
Okay, except for this one. That's why Albo's logbook also is very important because he was there.
Hmm.
Okay, he was there. And what he wrote there, whether it could be different from what Pigafetta said, no matter what, his his transcriptions in his logbook and his so-called coordinates still would lead to the fact that Magellan actually landed in Limasawa.
Hmm.
Well, if you've heard the latest, well, there's this historian from Palawan saying um, that after the death of Magellan, that the survivors landed in Palawan.
Hmm.
Okay, so it is not yet to be considered seriously because the National Historical Commission is still working on it. That's why, these things have to be looked into carefully.
Hmm.
No, not fast, no, because you have to make sure that you are interpreting it correctly. You know, so he made declarations about it. There was even a Portuguese paper that printed it, but
Hmm.
no comment from us. No comment. I mean, I was being asked to comment, said no comment. I will only comment on that if the National Social Commission comments on it. But we never considered that in our studies because it was not part of our job to declare whether Elcano and the crew of Magellan landed in Palawan or not.
Yeah. So
Okay.
it's still actually an open story, no? When you look at it.
Yeah. So I told the person because I knew the writer. Well, I told him that uh, he said well I cannot comment and you cannot comment because we were told by the National Solco Commission just to wait for them.
Hmm.
Okay. So I told him that well you can talk about it but maybe for the good of everyone do not make declarations yet that they finally landed in Palawan. Baka at the end, jokingly, I told him, baka at the end, there'll be another evidence saying contrary to what you're saying now.
Yeah.
Yun. But of course, sabi ko, I have not seen any document yet leading to that. So I said, just just wait for whatever decision the National Historical Commission would be.
All right. So siguro just to wrap up our conversation. What's the significance of 2021 or the 500th anniversary of the arrival of the Magellan expedition here in the Philippines? Because for Catholics, obviously, it's very significant because it's the first time that the Mass was offered here in our country. But some
Mm,
others, especially some of the debates on social media, if you have
yes,
been looking into it, they question why do we need to celebrate the arrival of Magellan if it means that it would be the start of the colonization of the Spanish. So
yes.
what's the significance and why do we need to celebrate it? Sige po.
Well, um, okay, let me give you the framework of the National Historical Commission. I'm talking not as a representative of the NHCP because I'm not with
Hmm.
the NHCP.
Yes.
Okay? Whatever I'm saying is not, it's just a repetition of what they said. Well,
Yeah.
even the calling of the first mass had to be reinvented. Because
Hmm.
when you say first mass, remember, are you from, maybe you've heard that there's another group of people saying that the first mass was celebrated at Bolinao, Pangasinan.
Yes.
So that's
Mhm.
another thing, which we did not consider because for simply lack of evidence.
Evidence.
And there's a marker there. It is believed that, well, you know the story, maybe that in the 13th century, a Franciscan monk passed through here, celebrated the Mass there, and they said that they have the diary of the original diary of the monk somewhere in some inside the monastery, a copy, and the original is in Italy. Okay,
Hmm.
but it it of course it was considered by the historical commission because again, uh, the marker is not officially National Historical Commission. It was a
Hmm.
marker made by the monk by the nuns there in Bolinao. Okay,
Yeah.
so but that's one thing. Okay, now during the span of our panel, we decided that maybe to avoid so much polemics on the first mass, let us make it more simpler. The first Easter Sunday celebration in the Philippines.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, which was basically already thought of by the National Historical Commission. Para it will not simply be, when people say the first mass, isipin Tuan and Limasawa. At least to avoid that a little bit, like with the first Easter Sunday Mass. Okay. Well, of course, we have to look into the fact that from the Julian calendar, we went to the Gregorian calendar.
Gregorian, yes.
Yeah. So that's why it ended up in March 31st, diba?
Hmm.
So, I mean, that's not polemical, but that's one point students of history should look into. Okay, the change. Okay.
Yes.
Now, so there are three things that we are celebrating next year, actually. First, we of course we have here the 500th anniversary of the first mass in the Philippines, the first Easter Sunday mass in the Philippines. Second, contrary, well, as compared to what was written by historians before, okay, about the arrival of the Spanish or the conquest of the
Discovery.
Philippines, we do not call it that, or we simply call it the
Yeah.
arrival of the Spanish now, okay?
Hmm.
Because we were never lost,
True.
we were never lost, okay? And thirdly, um, uh, the famous Battle of Mactan, di ba?
Hmm.
Okay. Uh, I think the official title now for that celebration is simply referred to as the Victory at Mactan.
Hmm.
Victory at Mactan. Because of course in our history book, diba, it was referred to as the first Filipino attempt to thwart foreign, I mean, there are so
Yes.
many things that could be interpreted for that. Whether you are on this particular part of the interpretation of historical events in the Philippines, or on the more, or on the other side, okay? So now they call it the Victory at Mactan.
Mm.
Okay, Victory at Mactan. Well, of course, this is also a way for the Philippines to look into the fact that it's not just us. You have the Spanish, you have the Portuguese. You know, in the conference in 2018, they wanted to make another celebration that is to celebrate, to to make it like a major celebration in all the points where the crew of Magellan stopped
Yeah.
from where he died all the way to the return to Spain. Okay, that's why the conference included South Americans, Indonesians, people from Timor,
Mm.
Guam. Kasi nga, they were all part of the route. Eh. They're all part. So you see, it's not just us. It's something, a major part of the world, okay, would benefit from.
Yes.
So that's one major point that I would like to emphasize. That it's not just about us. There are people, there are things also to be considered in that particular celebration.
All right. So, thank you so much. Thank you for this this conversation, no? So,
Okay.
sige, I'll stop recording na po muna.